Ever pondered who owns the massive ice cube at the bottom of the world? Well, buckle up. Welcome to the great frozen debate, a chilly saga of sovereignty and penguins. Antarctica, our planet's southernmost continent, is a barren, ice-covered landmass, mostly devoid of human life but a paradise for those suited and booted for sub-zero temperatures. Yes, we're talking about the waddling, tuxedoed residents, our friends the penguins. But here's the kicker. Humans, in our infinite wisdom and insatiable thirst for ownership, have been trying to stake a claim on this frosty wilderness. Enter the Antarctic Treaty System, an icy handshake between nations, designed to keep the peace and prevent a Cold War of a very different kind. This treaty, signed in the December of 1959, has a total of 54 parties. Now you might think, 54 countries, that's quite a crowd. But wait, there's a twist. Only 12 of these countries have made territorial claims, and these claims often overlap. Imagine a pie with too many hands grabbing for the same slice. It's a frosty mess. These 12 nations include the United Kingdom, Argentina, Australia, and even New Zealand. Yes, New Zealand, the land of hobbits and rugby, has a stake in this icy pie. And the United States? Well, they've not made a claim, but they've reserved the right to. It's like saying, I don't want a piece of the pie right now, but maybe later. And let's not forget the inherent absurdity of this all. We're talking about a continent primarily inhabited by penguins. Penguins! It's like hosting a dinner party and arguing over who owns the silverware, while the guests are left standing in the cold. In the end, what we're looking at is not just a frozen landmass, but a frosty version of a global game of Monopoly. Only instead of hotels and railroads, we're dealing with icebergs and research stations. So it's a frosty version of a global game of Monopoly, isn't it? Now let's dive into this ice-cold treaty that's supposedly keeping everyone in check. So what's this Antarctic Treaty System all about? Well, it's a bit like the schoolyard's version of no man's land. The Antarctic Treaty System, established in 1961, comprises a series of international agreements. These rules of the playground declare that the Antarctic is to be used solely for peaceful purposes and scientific research. Military activity, mineral mining, nuclear testing, and nuclear waste disposal are strictly prohibited. Imagine that, a place on Earth where we can't blow things up, dig for shiny rocks, or dump our radioactive leftovers. It's almost like we're trying to preserve something. But what's the point, you may ask? After all, it's a frozen wasteland devoid of any human civilization. Well, that's exactly the point. The Antarctic Treaty System serves to protect this pristine, icy wilderness from human interference. It's a rare example of global cooperation where over 50 nations have agreed to leave their territorial disputes at the door, all for the sake of preserving a continent that's too cold for most of us to live in anyway. It's as if the world leaders sat down and said, let's agree to disagree. Let's not ruin this one. It's a grand notion, isn't it? A continent dedicated to peace and science, where nations can cooperate instead of squabble. But let's not kid ourselves. This treaty isn't about altruism or some lofty ideal of world peace. It's about keeping the status quo, maintaining a delicate balance of power. If one country decides to break the rules and stake a claim, it could trigger a domino effect, leading to a free-for-all scramble for territory. So, in the end, this piece of paper is more than just a treaty. It's a thin line of ice holding back a potential avalanche of conflict. But hey, at least the penguins are safe, right? But seriously, who has the audacity to claim a continent, especially one that's more ice than land? Picture this, folks. We're talking about a vast stretch of frozen tundra, a landmass so inhospitable that it makes the Sahara look like a beach resort. Yet there are nations out there, itching to plant their flags on this icy expanse, as if it were some unclaimed piece of real estate in the suburbs. The audacity, right? It's almost comical, the extent to which we humans will go to lay claim over something. Even if that something is a barren, icy wasteland that's home to more penguins than people. But let's play along with this ridiculous charade for a moment. Let's say, hypothetically, a country does stake a claim over Antarctica. What would they even do with it? Build igloo suburbs and start a polar bear petting zoo? Maybe they're thinking of tapping into that vast reserve of ice. You know, in case the world runs out of ice cubes for their cocktails. But let's cut the sarcasm for a moment and get real. The sad truth is, It's not about the ice or the penguins. It's about what lies beneath that ice. The untapped reserves of oil, gas, and minerals. That's the real prize. It's a classic case of human greed trying to exploit every last inch of our planet regardless of the consequences. And who suffers in this absurd game of icy thrones? Well, it's not the countries playing tug-of-war with a continent. It's the wildlife that calls Antarctica home. The seals, the whales, and yes, the penguins too. These creatures, who have no concept of borders or ownership, are caught in the middle of a human power struggle, their home threatened by our insatiable appetite for resources. So, the next time you hear about a country trying to stake a claim over Antarctica, remember, it's not about some noble pursuit of uncharted territory. It's about greed, plain and simple. Maybe we should ask the penguins what they think about this. But what happens if someone decides to break this ice-cold treaty? No pun intended. Let's start with a little thought experiment. Imagine a world where the Antarctic treaty system is as fragile as a snowflake in a blizzard. Suddenly, the Antarctic becomes a free-for-all, a frozen gold rush, if you will. The first consequence we'd see is the very real possibility of international conflict. With 7 nations already staking their claim, it's not hard to imagine the tensions rising. Imagine Australia squaring off with Argentina, or the United Kingdom going toe-to-toe with Chile. Suddenly, the South Pole becomes a geopolitical chessboard, with nations maneuvering for control and influence. It's a chilling prospect, isn't it? But let's not forget about the environment. The Antarctic is a pristine wilderness, untouched by human hands. But if the treaty were to be infringed, we could see a rush for resources that could devastate this delicate ecosystem. Oil drilling, mining, overfishing. The list of potential environmental disasters is as long as a winter's night in the Antarctic. And the damage wouldn't be limited to the icy continent either. The knock-on effects would be felt around the world, from rising sea levels to shifts in weather patterns. And then there's the potential for resource exploitation. The Antarctic is rich in resources, from oil and gas to precious minerals. If the treaty were to be broken, it could trigger a rush for these resources, with nations and corporations scrambling to stake their claim. The result would be a race to the bottom, with the environment and the unique wildlife of the Antarctic paying the price. So you see, breaking the Antarctic Treaty isn't just about playing fast and loose with international law. It's about potentially sparking conflicts, devastating the environment, and exploiting resources that should belong to all of humanity, not just the highest bidder. So, the ice isn't just under our feet, it's thin too. So, what have we learned from this frosty fiasco? Let's take a moment to pull the wool over the icy facts we've discussed. We started with the Great Frozen Debate, a chilly battle of claims over the last unspoiled wilderness on Earth, Antarctica. The continent, larger than Europe and mostly uninhabited, save for a few thousand temporary residents, mainly scientists and, of course, the emperor penguins. 7 nations have laid claim to a slice of this frozen pie, but the Antarctic treaty system has put a freeze on those ambitions. In our second scene, we delved into the Antarctic treaty system, a beacon of cold peace, a rather frosty accord that has kept this icy playground devoid of military activity, nuclear tests, and mineral mining. It's a rare example of global unity, where over 50 countries have agreed to keep their mittens off Antarctica, preserving it for peaceful purposes and scientific research. We then journeyed into the absurdity of ownership, a concept as slippery as a slab of black ice. The idea that a country can own a piece of land thousands of miles away from its borders, in an environment as harsh and inhospitable as Antarctica, is as ludicrous as trying to sell ice to an Eskimo. Next, we took a chilling plunge into the consequences of breaking the ice, literally. We highlighted the potential fallout if a nation decides to infringe the Antarctic treaty system. Imagine a domino effect of territorial disputes, environmental degradation, and the disruption of delicate ecosystems. It's a Pandora's box of icy woes no one wants to open. And that brings us to this frosty conclusion. The Antarctic treaty system, while not perfect, has done a commendable job of preserving the peace and integrity of Antarctica. But it's a fragile piece, as delicate as a snowflake, that could shatter under the weight of greed and ambition. Remember, the next time you think about claiming a chunk of ice at the bottom of the world, you might be stepping on some diplomatic toes and possibly a few penguin flippers.